You're listening to The Financial Outfitter, helping turn dreams into cherished memories. Sponsored by BPG Planning, purpose-based personal financial planning because it's about more than your money.
Welcome to another episode of the Financial Outfitter podcast. Thanks for taking some of your precious time to be with us today. Here, we believe that the sporting lifestyle and the pursuit of it holds the remedy to the ailments that plague the human spirit in the modern world. And we'd like to think that we inspire people to turn their sporting dreams into reality. Today, we've got a guest coming in virtually, the, relatively new executive director for the Pennsylvania State Game Commission, Steve Smith. Steve, when people see this, it's going to be a very different time of year, but right now we're kind of right in the middle of deer season here in Pennsylvania. It's, I'm sure, a very busy time of year for you, so thanks for carving some time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
Absolutely, Brian. Glad to do it and looking forward to our discussion.
So you've been in the role of executive director for how long now?
Took over the role at the very end of April of this year of 24. So coming on 7-8 months now of being in this position. And as you would expect, absolutely feeling like I'm drinking from a fire hose since day one. This is a big agency. We have a lot of responsibilities. We have a lot of employees. We have an incredible responsibility, really, to manage 480 species of wildlife on behalf of the 12 to 13 million residents of Pennsylvania, but also on behalf of future generations. So the scope of our responsibility is quite incredible, but very honored to be in this position and help guide the agency moving forward.
So, Steve, you may be relatively new to the role of executive director at the Game Commission, but you're certainly not new to the commission itself. Maybe you could share a little bit about your career path with everyone.
Sure. So I've been with the agency the better part of 2 decades now. I took a very indirect route to get to this role. I started out for several years practicing law here in the Harrisburg area. I was convinced, all through college, law school, first couple years of my professional career, that's the direction that I wanted to go. However, I found out pretty shortly thereafter that it didn't provide much in the way of personal satisfaction. I'll put it that way. It was a very outcome-driven career path that didn't leave me very much time for any personal interest, and it certainly didn't bring any of my personal interest to bear. So after several years of that, I started recalibrating and thinking, what could I do differently professionally to bring some, to combine my personal interest. And the Game Commission was at the top of that list. I've been a lifelong hunter, trapper, somebody who enjoys the outdoors, appreciates public land, wildlife conservation. So I started with the agency, again, almost 20 years ago, handling legislative affairs. And I worked on drafting bills, guiding bills through the legislative process to the governor's desk and to becoming law. After about 7-8 years in that role, I stepped into the director of the Bureau of Information and Education position, where oversaw the agency's media relations, social science, as well as hunter trapper ed and hunter recruitment programs. Then in the beginning of this year, beginning of 24, I stepped into a deputy director role, and then in end of April of 24 became executive director. So a variety of positions with the agency, and I'd like to think all of my background has brought me to be in this position where I can now step in and help guide the agency moving forward.
I couldn't agree more with regards to the value of your background. I mean, it really seems that more and more of our sport lifestyle, right, is, whether we like it or not, subject to the current political environment, regulation, and it's not an easy thing to navigate. Having made a couple of trips out to Harrisburg over the last couple of years, it's a complicated process, and to start from ground zero and try to get something done seems almost impossible. But folks are going to see this, they'll view it at a very different time of year. But right now we're sitting in the middle, really, of the Pennsylvania deer season. And deer management, it's a big issue. It's at the core of what you do. So, or the agency does. So, can you share like harvest numbers and kind of where Pennsylvania is with its philosophy on managing the herd?
Yeah, and for a variety of reasons that I'm sure we'll get into, right now is one of the most critical times of the year. It's the Super Bowl of wildlife management in Pennsylvania. I know as a hunter myself, I know hunters feel that way. Firearms deer season, you mark that date early on in the calendar. You want to know when. For a lot of us, our life revolves around deer season, and it's that important to us as hunters. But what I've come to find from a wildlife management standpoint, it's just as important. It's just as critical. Deer have a significant ability, unparalleled really, to impact so many different areas of life, be it forest habitat, be it agriculture, be it from the health of the overall herd through things like CWD. All those things come together right now this time of year. We certainly had a very good and productive and lengthy archery season. But at the end of the day, firearms deer season still is the pinnacle. It's how we are able to achieve our harvest goals in a lot of areas. Weather has not been kind to us on
Mm-mm.
several different fronts. For a lot of us here in the South Central, we had a very dry and very warm archery
Mm-hmm.
season, which aren't conditions that you want to hear when you're thinking about archery season. You want that cold front coming in November, late October, that really pushes deer on their feet during daylight hours. And for a lot of the year, we didn't have that. We had a very dry and very warm archery season. Now the conditions are great in the firearm season. It's cold. That keeps deer moving. That keeps them looking for food during daylight hours. That early morning and late afternoon are going to be really good for our firearm deer hunters. However, we know, in a state the size of Pennsylvania, you can't paint with a brush that covers the whole
Yeah.
state. And a lot of our hunters in the Northwest are dealing with several feet of snow on the ground, with potentially more coming. So, weather is always a huge factor. It's the one thing we can't control when it comes to any of our hunting seasons. That's why our seasons are so long. That's why we don't depend on 1 or 2 days worth of harvest. We spread those seasons out. We want to create opportunities for our hunters to be out there, but never more so than right now. To manage the deer, we need an abundant deer population that's being hunted and harvested each year, and all indications are that that's exactly what's taking place right now.
Well, that's good news because from my own personal observation, I could say, "Oh, look, I've been seeing more deer than I ever have in the last 2 years." But you can't make decisions, policy decisions, based on what a couple of people say. But there does seem
Right.
to be a lot of evidence saying that the deer herd's pretty darn healthy, and we need to begin to explore ways to manage those numbers. So, is there any thought or policy being developed there to address that?
Yeah, a great question. And one thing I'll say right out of the gate here is I've come to learn that wildlife populations in Pennsylvania, particularly deer, are never static. Right?
Mhm.
They are always in flux. They are always swinging. That pendulum is always swinging back and forth between a population that's going toward too high versus a population that some might feel is going too
Mhm.
low. I don't know that there is a happy medium. I think those factors are always pushing on either side of the pendulum. Right now, in some areas of the state, there's factors that would be indicating that the pendulum has swung toward a population that's high, and maybe in the eyes of some too high. And one thing I did this summer is I spent a lot of time talking to members of the agricultural
Mhm.
community who feel very strongly that they would like to see the deer population lower in their areas. I think of farmers as being at the tip of the spear when it comes to deer populations. They feel those increases very quickly. More so than the rest of us will, more so than a hunter who spends as much time as they can in the woods, but that's going to be limited compared to a farmer who lives outside year round. So they're going to experience those deer population increases first. From what we've been hearing from a lot of members of the agricultural community, is they feel very strongly that the population has increased and they'd like to see some changes made. So, in talking to our board, we're preparing for the January Board of Commissioners meeting. That's really the first step in the process when our board adopts potential seasons and bag limits for the upcoming year. So in early January 25 is when they have that meeting, and then they have a second meeting in April that finalizes those potential changes. So I would expect to see our board take on some of these issues, particularly with the most pressing one, which is how can we provide some relief to our farmers that have said that they'd like to see the deer population be lowered in certain areas. But ultimately, our agency, our staff, our board is going to be looking at the harvest data that's being collected right now by our biologists out in the field and making decisions about where on a statewide level we should start reducing, or I should say at a wildlife management level, we should start reducing that population to get it under control. And again, it's always, no pun intended, it's a moving target. We're always trying to, I don't know that there's a perfect happy medium. We're always trying to balance a lot of factors and get close to where we feel that we should be from a population level.
It is a moving target, and one of the things that that I've said for a long time, the kind of dovetails along with this is, you know, policy's never going to hit the mark perfectly because Mother Nature's not directly involved. It's like ballot box biology. She doesn't get the vote, so it's really never going to work. You've got to keep pursuing new opportunities. So if you identify a place that needs a population reduction, that seems to be the challenge. And I know that there's a red tag opportunity that is somewhat specific to one individual farmer can decide that they're going to participate, invite hunters to help them with the issue, but that doesn't stop the deer from simply going to neighboring properties and not necessarily resulting in the desired effect. So I think it's going to take some creativity and a good bit of cooperation between a whole lot of people.
You're exactly right. I think if there is any comfort from what I've learned in talking to my counterparts across the country, is we're certainly not the only state dealing with this. Things have changed as far as hunting over the past couple of decades, but probably none more so than the proliferation of private land, lands where individuals used to be able to hunt. A sprawling farm that is now a housing development has a significant impact when it comes to deer management, because deer don't need a lot of habitat to survive. They can flourish inside a small woodlot where they can be during the day and then come out at night and wreak havoc essentially on that landscape, that housing development, and then go back to that area. And if our hunters can't get in there and help manage that population by removing some of the deer out of that area, then we are going to continue to have problems. And we're seeing that over and over and over again with the loss of habitat. Becomes areas where it's not just impacting wildlife, that loss of habitat, but it's also impacting our hunters. And where deer populations are able to thrive are some of those areas on the suburban urban areas where it's exactly what you said. The deer our hunters might be able to get to one area, be it through a farmer who opens up his land to hunting, or be it a game lands. But if there's still availability of private land where we can't get our hunters into those areas and the deer are able to take cover, then it's going to continue to be a problem. So again, it's a challenge that that all our counterparts across the country are having, and it's a relatively new one. But it's certainly one that doesn't have an easy fix, and that is, how can we get our hunters onto those areas where deer are thriving right now?
Well, I think another big topic, and I wouldn't have anticipated it being so controversial, that would speak to our ability to have some impact on harvest rates, is Sunday hunting, right? So
Absolutely.
Senate bill, 67, makes it to the goal line and again doesn't get implemented. And
Right.
Just again from my personal experience and actually being there, um, sometimes it's hard to explain to someone that hasn't participated in the process of going from an idea to a regulation that there
Yeah.
are so many competing interests. One would think this is simple, just okay, Sunday hunting. That's not how the process works. It's a
Right.
much more convoluted process than one might think. But I think one of the things that I'd like to shine a light on that maybe a lot of people in Pennsylvania don't realize is the unique nature of the Pennsylvania Game Commission in that it is an independent agency. It's not funded directly by the state. Now, do you see
Correct.
that as an advantage or maybe a disadvantage?
I absolutely see that as an advantage. I think that when the legislature came together to create the Game Commission, they showed a lot of foresight and a lot of wisdom in that they separated the Game Commission away from the general budget process. And what they wanted to do, and they made this in so doing, they made the statement that wildlife management is important enough that it shouldn't be part of the horse trading that takes place when there's a state budget enacted.
Mhm.
And it's true with the state budget, and it's true, and I think you hit the nail on the head with every legislative uh, priority bill that goes through. There's always give and take. I've never seen a bill, doesn't matter what it is, it might be the best idea in the world.
Yeah.
I've never seen a bill just go from that form to being signed by the governor. There's always compromises, um, winners and losers, give and take. There's always, a consensus has to be developed. Whatever it is, at the end of the day, the finished product looks different than the beginning one. And when they created the Game Commission, they wanted us to be separate from that because ultimately funding drives everything. And we needed money. We needed the ability to exist. We needed the ability to fund the projects that need to get done and to do so separate from the state budget process. And I couldn't be more grateful. And I know
Mhm.
everyone who sat in my chair has been when that we're not part of
Mhm.
that we operate different than that. And it was quite a statement that wildlife management in Pennsylvania is too important to be part of a political process. We believe it should be independent, largely funded through the end users, through our license buyers, and that's how we've been able to operate. And ideally, we will continue to do so.
I don't think you can stress that point enough, really. When we look across the country, you see what's happening in other states where that is not the case.
Right,
Politics agenda has taken center stage in states like Oregon, Washington, and the latest, you know, Colorado, where,
right,
you know,
right.
science based wildlife management has had to take a back seat to the ballot box, which is
Yes.
just absolutely ridiculous. That's my position on it. There's no place for politics in wildlife management, but I do think that there's a huge advantage for Pennsylvania being separate. And I might be wrong, but I think that Pennsylvania Game Commission is a model for many other game agencies. I mean, at least we still have the word game in the title.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It's quite a testament to Pennsylvania and our sporting culture that sportsmen and women have fought to keep it this way for as long as they have. Where exactly as you said, we were able to keep politics out of the funding of the agency. Worst case scenario would be us in a situation where the science indicates that our board should be making a decision, but then the repercussions of doing so would be to have our funding cut. That's the worst
Mm-hmm.
case scenario, and that's quite frankly that's happened. We've seen it
Mm-hmm.
happen in other states, and the way that the legislature created us and the way that we've been able to maintain, and again, it's only because of the support of our sportsmen and women, because of the support of those who care about wildlife, and because of the legislature recognizing the value of it, we've been able to be separate from all that. And I would certainly concur that I think it's a model that works best And I think a lot of my counterparts would probably agree with that.
Kind of sticking on the political side of things, the fact that Sunday hunting didn't get done. Um, when it comes to the legislative process, I'm by no means an expert, but I'm thinking that this whole topic almost has to be picked up from scratch next year if it's going to, be implemented. It's not like you can take exactly what you had and just try it again. What do you think
Yeah,
the environment, the appetite for that is in Harrisburg?
I certainly agree with that. I think I'm encouraged by what happened
Hmm.
last year, and it was frustrating. I use the analogy as a sports fan. There's the question: would you rather lose a game by 1 point, or would you rather be blown out? I think the 1 point loss hurts the most. And for Sunday hunting, it was a 1 point
Hmm.
loss. Like we were, as you said, right on the goal line. We were as close as we could ever be. But when you get separated and take a step back, um, you know, having been involved in this issues for almost 20 years now, the conversation about Sunday hunting has changed. And I think that it's changed from if Sunday hunting will happen to when. And that's a huge step forward. And 20 years ago, the question wasn't when. We weren't sure if it would ever happen. It was a legitimate case could be made that this is how we're always going to be. We'll never have the ability for our board of commissioners to regulate wildlife 7 days a week. We're always going to have our hands tied. But that certainly has changed. To come as close as we did to lose by 1 point, it's heartbreaking. But I think it's a lot to build on. And I'm excited going into next legislative session when it begins in January. We want to hit the ground running. We want to build that coalition back up. And it was a broad coalition
Very broad.
to have the Farm Bureau right there, with the hunting community that came together, and everybody speaking with one voice and saying this needs to happen. If we can pick that up, have that coalition again, be right back at the table and say, hey, let's get this thing done this time. I'm optimistic that we'll be able to do so.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way because that's how I was feeling, but I just didn't know whether there was any validity to it because you never
Yeah,
know.
no, I think there is. Yeah, and we were so close. There's no doubt about it. We were on the verge.
Hmm.
I think the time to move is right into 25 when that new session starts, and carry that message of hey, it's everything's teed up now. Let's make whatever changes to that bill that we need to make it better. But let's get that thing across the finish line and get it to the governor.
You know, probably one of the other big topics that you see. I mean, I live in Butler County, so I'm on the west side of the state, and I really have not
Right.
run into directly a case of chronic wasting disease, but it's here.
It
And I'm
is.
sure it's a serious concern for people that have dealt with it. What's the state of the nation on that here in Pennsylvania?
CWD is quite frankly, it's an awful disease. Um, Nobody ever wants to see it. Once it gets into your state, it has the ability to spread pretty quickly. And that is, in fact, exactly what's happening in those areas down in the south central part of our state where it's taken hold. Um, a lot of theories on the best way to handle CWD, but at the end of the day, the only one that has the broad support across the scientific community is the best way to manage CWD and to lower the risk of spreading that disease is by reducing deer
Hmm.
populations. Um, all the evidence would indicate that it's a disease that spreads by deer to deer contact. If you've ever seen a group of deer in the woods together, you know that they are social animals and that the potential exists for deer to deer contact when they're, be it, putting their muzzle into the same scrape, be it, reaching for the same acorns. And then, of course, the mating process, whatever it may be, deer are social animals and there's the potential for deer to deer contact. And every time it happens when you have infected deer, that deer is potentially spreading that disease to other animals. So reducing deer populations is the one management tool that is accepted within the scientific community. So where it happens, where it's prevalent, where it's spreading, our responsibility is then to use hunters as the first line of dealing with that disease and try to reduce the populations through be it expanding seasons or increasing antlerless deer allocations. And that's never really our goal. We'd like to, as hunters ourselves, we'd want nothing better than for there to be an abundant deer population all across the state, where hunters have a great chance of seeing large numbers of deer and shooting them. But in areas where CWD is taking foot and taking hold, we need to do the responsible thing from a management standpoint, which is reduce those populations.
So when a hunter harvests a deer that's suspected of CWD, what's their next step?
Yeah, as somebody who lives in a disease management area myself, live and hunt in two areas. The first step is to utilize the head bins, as we call them, that the Game Commission has put on the landscape. So, whenever I shoot a deer in my area, and I'll take it to a processor most of the time, I ask that then they cut that head off so that I can take it to a head bin and drop it into that bin so that it can the biologist can come along, pull that head, test the brain there for samples and see if that deer is positive. For me personally, I won't consume a deer that I got back from a processor until it's been tested and until I know that it tested negative for the disease. We really recommend individuals to go through that steps. Is it a bit of an inconvenience? Yes, potentially, but it's certainly worth going through those steps to make sure that that deer is coming back not testing positive for the disease. That's how we at the Game Commission can tell if the disease is spreading and where it's spreading, and that way that the successful hunter, has a little bit of comfort, a lot of it comfort, knowing that they're not eating meat that might be from an infected deer. So those are the steps that we really recommend hunters take.
So how have those numbers been trending over the last couple of years in terms of cases?
They've been trending
Yeah.
up. That's what we would expect to see. That's what happens in every state where the disease is prevalent. Is it starts to spread, and that's where we go back to. We have a responsibility to do the make the hard decisions from a management standpoint, which is where it's spreading and knowing that it's potential to spread. We have an obligation to reduce the deer populations in those surrounding areas.
Yeah. So it looks like we're closing in on last light here at the Den. And with that, I'd like to always give our guests the opportunity to maybe share some upcoming events, some important contact information about your organization, whatever it might be, words of encouragement for hunters, whatever you'd like to share, Steve.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that, Brian, and thanks for the opportunity to talk today. And I'll just end by briefly touching on two things that we already covered, but I wanted to stress them. First is our board is going to be going through that process of setting the seasons and bag limits for the 2025 season. We love nothing more than hearing input from our hunters, and we know our hunters feel passionate about these issues. But this is the time to be involved and to make your voice heard, and wherever it might be on the spectrum as far as any different species out there. But we want to make the best decisions. Our board wants to make the best, most informed decisions that they can. So I really encourage hunters to be involved, and it's always striking to me when I talk to hunters who aren't aware of that process and don't realize what the board does. And in so doing, they're not realizing that they play a role and they're missing out on their opportunity to be heard. So I would really encourage hunters to be involved. But then, second, I know we've talked about it, but I can't stress it enough. We were so close on Sunday hunting, and the only way that we're going to get it across the finish line is by our sportsmen and women making their voices heard. So even if you already did so in the past couple of months, even if you already reached out to your representative or senator, once 2025 starts, it's a fresh slate. We're starting over from zero with all the momentum that we have. So I'd really encourage our hunters to do it again. If you've reached out already, send another email, make another phone call. But if you haven't been involved, then man, we really need you right now. We are so close. We can get this thing done, and we can really move forward and start having the ability to have hunting 7 days a week, where the species can handle it and where it's feasible to do so. But it's going to have to be with our hunters making their voice heard. So, so I guess for both issues, we're really asking for your input. We manage wildlife on behalf of of all Pennsylvanians, but certainly our hunters are right at the forefront. So we want you to be engaged in that process.
So besides reaching out to your local representative, how can hunters have input on seasons? Like how do they make that contact?
Sure. When it comes to seasons, we have on our website the ability to contact the
Hmm.
agency. So we provide it's right on our homepage. Contact us. Any email that comes in through there will go to our board of commissioners, so they can review the comments that they've received and make their decisions. Based on what they feel is in the best long-term interest of our sport. So it's right there on our website. When contacting your legislators about legislative issues is certainly appropriate. But I think one way also to make your voice heard, be it through our commissioners or be it to the legislature, is through joining an organization. There's plenty of NGOs, the non-government organizations that are really active. Be it Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs, be it Wild Turkey, right down the list. Pheasants Forever, SEI, you could go on and on. Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. These are all groups that are really active. So I would encourage anybody who has an interest in these things and really wants their voice to be heard, contact our board, contact the legislature, join a stakeholder group, join an NGO, and really be involved in the process.
Yeah, I love that. Couldn't agree more. Love the call to action. It's a drum that I've been beating, and I think that SCI will be putting the full court press on a few of those
Absolutely.
things in the new
Absolutely.
year.
Right.
So thanks again for your time. I really appreciate you making it happen today. And for our listeners, please remember to give us a like and subscribe to the podcast. When you do, you're becoming a member of the pack, not the herd.
Our mission is to promote new connections in the sporting community by bringing awareness to opportunities and issues that impact our lifestyle, challenge members to think critically about their role in the modern world, and help others to turn dreams into cherished memories. This episode is sponsored by BPG Planning, purpose-based personal financial planning, because it's about more than your money.